Hi folks, it's Kieran. I'm just going to do a little video here, hopefully, to run over the basics again that we did on Saturday. It's for those who couldn't make it along on Saturday, or those who'd like to, or maybe missed a bit of the session, or those who'd like to review again what we did, have a little reference for that. Hopefully this video won't be too long, and I'm going to try and get into it now, so let's see how we get along. Here is the Blender program, which you probably are familiar with already. By now you've all been, anyone who's here on Saturday at least knows what it looks like. This is what Blender looks like when you start first. You've got the famous default cube in the middle of the screen. And additionally at the moment I've turned on over here, over here, you can see my mouse pointer now. Over here I've turned on the screen cap keys that show when I press buttons on the mouse and other keys as well, so you can see that. So when I'm doing stuff I'll be saying the keys that I'm pressing, but you'll also see nearly all of the keys that I've pressed at least come up down here. Sometimes they won't show up and I'll try and make a point of mentioning when that happens. But yeah, generally the keys I'm pressing will show up down in that corner there. So the first thing we're going to do is simply to rotate around this cube and change the angle at which we're looking at it. And to do that we hold the middle mouse button on our mouse. So everyone should have a scroll mouse for this, with a mouse with a scroll wheel. So hold down the middle mouse button and then just move the mouse around, and you will see that this cube pans around as you do, or orbits about as you do that. So that's the first thing we do. To rotate around the current object, you simply hold the middle mouse button down and move it, and it rotates about. Rolling the mouse wheel, then rolling the scroll wheel on the mouse, zooms in and out. So the combination of the two of those, you find you can move around at different levels of zoom, back and forward, holding down the mouse button again to move, and the scroll wheel to come in and out. And the final one is that you hold the shift key down. So that's on there's two on your keyboard. I'm using the one on the right hand side, or the left hand side of my keyboard, because the mouse is in my right hand. And again, holding down the middle mouse button and shift at the same time. This time moving the mouse, you see it doesn't rotate around, but rather slides or pans the content about on the screen. So a combination of those three will get you wherever you need to go. So that's important to know how to do that, because you're always going to want to see, you're working on a particular part of the model, you're going to need to be able to get around and see where that is. Okay, so let's look at some basic operations that you can perform in Blender. These are sometimes referred to as transforms, and there are three basic types of transforms. The first one is just movement in a straight line. That's also known as a translation. And the second one is a rotation, where you actually spin something about. And the final one is a scale. So there's three different sorts. We're going to start with just straightforward movement first. So at the moment this cube is not selected. When I click on it with the left mouse button, it now gets an orange outline, which means now that it is selected. So now when I perform operations, it will be on this cube, because the program now knows what I'm talking about. So the first thing we're going to do is do a movement. Now I use the keys in Blender for everything, special kind of shortcut keys for commands, and that's how I'm going to tell everybody else to do it as well, because they're by far and away the easiest way to use Blender once you learn them. It takes you a couple of times trying to learn them in the first place, but once you know them, Blender is much easier to work with. So there's a little learning hump at the start, but then after that you'll be glad that you learned to use the keys. So the key for move is actually G, and so you can think of it as go. Most of the keys are more easy to remember than that, but G is the key to move. So you can think of it as go, G to go. So if I press the G key now, you'll see that the outline of the cube has changed there. It's changed color to white, indicating that we're sort of starting to do something. And so if I move the mouse button about now, you can see that the cube follows around with me. So I can now click the left mouse button, and that confirms the operation that I've just done. it now fixes the cube in place. If I rotate around now, you see the cube is no longer there in the center of the screen where it was, but it's moved off a bit, off to the side, and up a little bit as well, off that ground, what we might call the ground plane there. So that's how to just start doing a movement, just a very basic dragged movement. I'm going to now move the cube back to its position here at the center, and I'm going to do that by undoing what we did last. So there's two ways to do an undo. One is the keystroke control, holding the control key down, the one that says CTRL on your keyboard, and then pressing Z, or going to the edit menu here in Blender and pressing undo. Either is fine. Undo is your friend in Blender when something happens that you didn't intend, which happens to all of us at some stage. You hit an accidental keystroke or something else and your model goes all funny. Control Z or undo there from the edit menu will put things back the way they were to the previous step, and you can usually undo a few times if you've gone a few steps on and you want to keep going back. Another way to cancel an operation in Blender is if you haven't finished it yet. So let me start moving again. If I start moving this cube and I go, you know what, I didn't want to move it. There's two ways now that you can cancel this operation. The first one is to press the right mouse button in the middle of this movement. So right mouse button cancels the operation and moves the cube, goes back to where it was when you started. I'll start that move again, G. The other way to do it is to hit the escape key. That's the one that says ESC, and it's usually at the top left of your keyboard, escape. So escape or right mouse button will cancel an operation that you're in the middle of in Blender. So if something starts and you want to get out of it, escape or the right mouse button, it doesn't matter which, are your get out of this operation keys. In fact, although I didn't mention it at the time, when you are moving and when I said you can left click to confirm the operation, you can usually hit the enter key to confirm it as well. So the return key on your keyboard will also confirm an operation. So there are two ways to confirm an operation and two ways to cancel an operation. Again, I'm just going to go Control Z to go back to the origin again, back to the center. I've mentioned the origin a couple of times, so perhaps I should just spend a minute on what I mean by that before I talk too much more. You can see these lines on the screen, the red ones and the green one. And those are what are known as the x-axis, this red one, and the y-axis, this green one. And those are the two directions on this flat ground plane. So any position on here can be measured as so many meters along x and so many meters along y. So for example, this is a grid here on the ground. I think that's 10. So this position here would be 10 meters up in x and 10 meters across in y. So that would be 10 in x, 10 in y, and none in z. Z is the one that goes up down. So any position of anything in here could be described with those three numbers as how far along x is it, how far along y is it, how far along z is it. While moving, you can see this widget over here is useful actually for that. You can see that moving up in z, sorry, the ones that have letters on them, they're the positive directions. So moving plus 10 in y would move you that way, whereas moving minus 10 in y will move you that way. In x, moving plus 10 will move you this way, moving minus 10 will move you this way. So it's the one without the letter on it is the minus direction. The one with the letter on it is positive direction. Moving up again would be positive in z, so up 10 would be up that way, minus 10 would be down. So that's just a thing to remember. Plus means go one direction, minus means go the other direction. Sorry, I've done that backwards. Plus means go this way for x, minus means go that way. So that's something to remember. This little thing up here is useful as well. It's another way to pan around the model actually. If you click on it and drag it there, it's the same as holding the middle mouse button down. So I'm left clicking there and holding the middle mouse button. You can also use that to orbit around. And you can also use it to snap into special views. So clicking on the X there, that's what's known as I think that's a front view, isn't it? Let me just you know, I can't remember just off the cuff. Let me make sure this is another way to pick these views is from here. Front, no, this front is looking along Y. Yeah, okay, so that's front, and side is looking in along X. So you can see that I'm looking along the Y-axis now, straight into the screen, and so I can't see the Y-axis anymore. It's just running straight in, but I can see the Z-axis running up and the X-axis running across. So one way to get these views is to pick them from over here. The other way, so this top and bottom, front and back, right and left. The other way, and the quickest way to get them, is also just to click on the little widgets, little coloured balls here on the view. So you can see as I click those, it rotates around to show the different sides the cube is coming around each time. It's easier to tell what's happening actually, because this icon represents a camera. You can actually see that is kind of spinning around as I click. It's not so obvious between those two, but essentially that's what it's doing. I'm rotating around. Again, I can look down from the top, or I can look up from the bottom. They all look the same because it's a cube, so perhaps it's a little hard to understand what's going on there. But those views, those kind of special views, are very handy sometimes when you're trying to work precisely, because it's impossible to grab this cube just in this view and start moving it and not have it kind of go, where's it gone? Is it gone up? Is it gone down? Well, it's actually gone up, but I wasn't sure. I couldn't really tell from how I was looking at it from this angle what direction did it move in. So whereas if I went straight in from the side and moved it, now I'm clear that it's moved up a bit and it's moved across, but I also know that it didn't move that way at all, because that's the way I was looking in at it. I hope that makes sense. So that's the basics of the axes, and it's useful to have that already in mind. I probably should have done that first before moving anything, but it's useful to have that in mind. So that one way of moving is just to hit G and then just dragging around, but it's a bit uncontrolled, so we don't usually want to do that. Normally we want to be a bit more specific about the direction we want to move in. So if we hit G and then we hit the letter of one of these axes, so let me try that with the Y-axis. So let me hit G and Y. Now you'll notice that the Y didn't appear over here, which I would like it to do, but that's a limitation of Blender's screencast keys. The kind of secondary keys that you press, they don't show up, so you just unfortunately just going to have to take it from me that I hit it. But you can kind of see the green axis has lit up a bit there, and now when I move, no matter what I do, it only slides along that line. It only slides back and forward in Y. It's not moving in any other direction. It's not moving in X at all. It's not moving in Z at all. It only moves in Y. So again, I'll do that again, except I'll do it next this time. I hit G again, then I hit X, and again now when I drag, it just slides back and forward in X. It doesn't go in any other direction. So you can do a much more controlled movement that way. And finally, if I hit G and Z, again now it'll only move up and down. I can't make it move any other way. Oh, sorry, I did manage to make it move some other way by hitting a key, which I didn't mean to. GZ, I must have cancelled. So GZ again, it's just moving up and down, and that's all it's going to do. So that's useful. You could also tell it to move a particular amount in a particular direction. So I could say, again, you're not going to see the keys after G, so you just have to trust it. But if I say G and Z and 5, and then hit return or click the left mouse button, it will move up 5 units in the x-axis. Again, I'm going to control Z again to move it back. If I said G, Z, and this time -5, again it'll move 5, but it'll move down this time. So that's very useful as well, to move it a precise amount in a particular direction. And the last one that we might talk about is how to move it. Sometimes you want to move it in 2 axes at once, but not the third. You want to lock it in the third. So let's just say I want to take this cube and I wanted to drag it around the ground plane here, but I didn't want it to move up or down at all. There's a way to do that too. So again, this time I'm going to hit G, and I want not X. So I'm going to hit, to say not X, I'm going to go Shift and X. And what you'll see there is that the see the green and red axes are lit up, and when I drag this around now, it's moving around pretty freely. But if I click and put it somewhere, and now look in from the side, you'll see, or I can choose one of these special views, you'll see that it didn't move up or down at all. It stayed perfectly in place vertically. It did allow me to slide it around though in the other two axes freely. So that's another one that's quite useful. And that idea of putting those keys on things will translate to other operations later on. You'll see how that works. So that was movement. So G is the key for move, and you can think of it as go if that's helpful. G followed by a letter will lock to that axis. G followed by a shift and a letter will lock to the other two axes, but not that one. And G and a letter, and then an axis letter, and then a number will move that many units along that axis. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, I'm going to select the cube because it wasn't selected, and we're going to go to the second type of translation, and this one is a scale. So scale is very easy to remember. The key for scale is S. If I just hit S on its own and start dragging the mouse in and out, you'll see that it just scales the cube uniformly in all directions. So that's good. If you look over here, actually, we didn't talk about this yet, but you can see actually the location here, the numbers are set here. You can actually see when you drag it around, those numbers will change, and you can also change the numbers here directly if you did have a precise location to go to. So there, by changing Y to 5, see it's moved it 5 units along the Y direction, the positive Y direction, because that's, if I went -5, it would go the other side. Yeah, there you go. So you can see the location there is tracked. I haven't touched on the rotations yet, that's the most complicated one, so I'll leave that for a moment. And the scales are all here as well. The default for the location, I just set that back to 0. That's another way to put it back to the origin, back to the center. Is 0, 0, 0 for location and 0, 0, 0 for scale, or for rotation, excuse me. But the defaults for scale are 1, 1, 1, 1. Sorry, I'm not doing a good job typing 1. 1, there we go. If you set scale to 0, your object will vanish in that direction. So I set X to 0, and you said that it just becomes vanishingly small in X. You really don't ever want to do that. So 1 is the default for scale. So if we wanted to scale this cube in one direction but not in the others, let's say we wanted to scale it along the X direction there, I could hit S to scale, but I could also now hit X to say what direction I want to scale in. And then when I drag, it only changes the scale in X. You can see it on the right hand side too. You can see the scale changing for X, but the other two are not changing at all. And so again, that's useful when we want to start shaping something more specifically. You can also scale and along 2 axes and lock the third. So I could say scale, and this again, like move, shift X, and then it will scale in the other 2 axes, but not along the X axis. So you'll see that, you'll see that this width never increases, the X width never increases. That's the X width. But the other 2, the Y width up to down there, Y and, sorry, that's the Z, excuse me, Z width, and the Y one across here, that's the Y scale. Those do get bigger, but this one never does because we've locked it. Alright, so just undo all those marks and back. So scale is S, and again, the things that you kind of learned about what you can do with scale, you can do as well with movement. You can do with scale. And the last one is rotation. So if I hit OR to rotate, OR is the command to rotation, OR, and move the mouse, it's just like I have put a pin from the center of the screen down into the object that I'm looking at, and this pin is locking the center of rotation. The object rotates around that imaginary pin. So if you look at what's happening there, I think that's kind of obvious. If I try and orient it so that I'm looking straight onto one of those corners, so I'm just kind of, my view is as close as I can get it straight onto that corner there. So the corner is aligned with the center. you can see it's not perfectly aligned, but you can see that corner is kind of close, really staying close to the middle. I haven't been able to be accurate enough with that position to make it work, but that's the, and you can kind of see the pin is straight in from the middle of the screen into that center point, and everything rotates about that. Again, you're not usually going to want to rotate so freely like that, and normally you want to be more precise about the location, about the amount of rotation that you're doing. If I look in from the top of this and I rotate like that, then I'm going to get a more sort of sensible looking rotation, depending on what you're trying to do. But generally you'll almost never just rotate in this sort of off-centered view, because unless you want something at a kind of a random angle, it's going to be hard to get any sort of precise angle that you want. With rotation, as I say, it normally happens around this imaginary pin from the center of the screen into the object, but you can also rotate around any of the standard axes as well. So if I say OR and then I type the Z key, so that's the blue horizontal, blue top to bottom axis, and I rotate, it's now rotating about that axis only. It's more obvious if I move a bit, or Z. You can see it's spinning around that blue axis instead, so that's helpful. Again, you can rotate around any of the other two, and you can also lock one while rotating the other two. So I could say, I don't know if that makes much sense, I'm not sure when you do this, but let's say or shift Y, so now it'll rotate, I can rotate it around the other axes but not around Z. Sorry, not around Y. I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense, but it's possible. And of course you can manually type a rotation in here as well. So, you know, 45 degrees around Z to put it onto that sort of perfect 45 degrees to the corners. So that's move, rotate, scale and rotate, the kind of three basic translation operations. So that's one of the major, and the axes and these kind of standard views are the kind of major, some of the major topics we tackled on Saturday. The final one was that we talked about the second main mode of the program. We're currently in object mode, and we talked then about edit mode. So object mode is when you have objects kind of built, but you want to move them around and position them relative to each other in the scene. But when you're actually making things, usually you're going to work in edit mode. So I'm going to click into edit mode now, and you can see the view changes a little bit. We've got a whole bunch of new tools down the side here, that's for starters. But also you notice that the cube looks a bit different. We've now got these dots on the corners, and we've got kind of yellow lines between the dots, and these faces are all selected as well. So what you're seeing there are the three parts of a 3D object, the three things that make up a 3D object, or a mesh, or a 3D mesh. So the first one is the vertices, and vertices are these corner points. So you see we've got 8 on a cube, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the top, and another 4 on the bottom. So vertices are just points in space. Then we have edges. Edges are this straight lines that run between vertices. So we've got, you know, an edge there, an edge there, an edge there, and an edge there. And finally you've got faces. A face is a space bounded by kind of a flat shape bounded by 3 or more. It's usually either 3 or 4 edges. I didn't say this on Saturday, so I might have to remember to say it next Saturday. So if you've got 3 edges on a face, it's called a triangle, or a tri. If you have 4, it's called a quad. And in Blender we tend to use quads as much as possible. We don't like shapes that have more than 5 edges, or 4 edges if we can help it. We call those n-gons, and they tend to give problems to the computer when it's trying to draw them, render them out. It doesn't really know how to draw them well. So the way the light kind of falls on them tends to produce weird artifacts, and it doesn't look quite right. So we tend to try and avoid them as much as possible in Blender. there's a classic case where there's an n-gon in Blender appears is at the bottom of a cylinder, for example. A standard cylinder in Blender, the bottom of the cylinder is an n-gon. I'll point that out when we get a chance to see it again. So when we're in edit mode here, we can manipulate this mesh at a much lower level, and we can really start reshaping it. So I'm just going to click off to the side, and you see it's just deselected everything. I just clicked at space there away from the object. We're currently in vertex selection mode. I don't know if you can see these little buttons up here. This is, so I want to select vertices, this is I want to select edges, and this one's I want to select faces. So if I just have this one first, this vertex select, I can click on these little corners here, and you can see them light up when they're selected. When I click on one, the other deselects. If I want to select more than one, there's a few ways to do it, but the simplest one is to hold the shift key down and keep clicking, and then instead of deselecting, when I go to the other one, it'll add them onto the selection. So again, I'm just going to click off and select nothing. You'll notice that when I click on two vertices that are joined by an edge, that edge also lights up. So this edge is also selected. And again, when I click on all the vertices around a face, the face is also selected. So now the four vertices are selected, the four edges are selected, and the face itself are all selected. So sometimes that's important to know. I can go and select edges directly, again just by clicking on this button, and now when I click I select whole edges, again I can also shift and select several edges at once. And finally the last one is select whole faces, and again I'm left clicking here, and again shift, I can click and select a number of faces at once. So that's the basics of kind of the basic selection. If I just click on one of these vertices, you might imagine that I could move it, and you would be absolutely right. And you might not be surprised to learn that if I want to move a vertex, it's the same command that I used to move the object previously. It's just G. So G on its own, again, just like before, will just free move it. I can hit G on an axis, G, X, to move it only along one axis at a time. Or I can hit G and shift an axis to move it in two axes but not in the third. So if I can say G shift Z, so I'll move it horizontally, but it won't move vertically at all. Similarly, you can scale things. In here now, you can't scale a vertex, that doesn't make any sense, and you can't rotate a vertex, that doesn't make any sense either. So I don't think you can rotate a vertex. No, that doesn't mean anything. But you can, if you have more than, if you have a couple of vertices selected, you can scale them, for example. So if I select that whole edge there, and I hit scale, it's going to scale that edge itself, just the edge. So it's a bit like that edge is a rubber band, and it can make it smaller. It'll stay on that same line that it's on, that same exact direction, but it'll pull the vertices closer together or push them further apart. So that's what scaling an edge one edge looks like. Similarly, I can select a whole face. Sorry, I'm just undoing. Select a whole face. Pardon me. Now I can scale the face. See, again, it kind of keeps it. Just let me do it from the side. You can see it keeps the face kind of where it was, but it just pushes everything out from the center. So again, I'm making it kind of I'm changing the shape of it from a cube into more of a pyramid shape. And you can select a bunch of faces at once, and you can scale them obviously, and you get starts to get a bit weird possibly. But you can kind of see what's happened. Sort of makes sense. You're getting some weird effects on the edges here now because there really isn't enough geometry to handle this sort of very weird. We've made to an extreme a bend on this side, so it sort of looks a bit peculiar from some angles. Hard to explain maybe, but normally we'd want more vertices and edges in there to get that to look good. And of course you can also rotate a face. Again, this is something we don't do as often, but again, just rotate. You can rotate it along a particular axis. So if I rotate RX, You see it'll just tilt around X there. So this can be useful as well. So that's the same commands that we use to scale and rotate and translate or move are all the same here in edit mode. But the effects are quite different because here we really are starting to reshape this cube. The trouble with the cube is it's just a little too basic for us to make any sort of interesting thing out of it right as it stands. And so really, you know, we might start with the cube because it's roughly close in shape to the thing we want to make, but we want to add more geometry in here. We want more vertices, we want more edges, we want more faces that we can start to move and push around and shape. So the last thing I did on Saturday was to talk about how you insert an edge loop into an existing mesh like this. An edge loop effectively is a kind of a cut that'll go all the way around an object, cutting all of the edges where it passes through, making a complete loop around. So to put an edge loop in, you need to press Control and R, and then you don't see anything at the moment, but when I move the mouse pointer close to an edge of any of the edges on the cube, you can see a yellow line comes up, and it's actually going right around. Let's say it cuts right around the object. So let me just hit right. I'm just going to right mouse button and cancel because I want to tilt the cube up to a better angle for us to work on. So again, I'm going to go Control R. So you'll see if I come against any of these sides that are kind of running straight up the side of the cube, you see you get the same kind of line around the edge. This line cuts those edges in half, but it doesn't just cut the one I'm touching, it goes all the way right around. It's like slicing that way, like it's slicing through, like cutting a slice out of a loaf of bread, cutting right through. If I touch the any of these ones on the side here, you see where the cut's going to be. And similarly, if I touch any of these ones, you can see the cut's going to go that way. So until I actually click, it's not cut anything, but I want to decide, I want to move until I get to place where, so move near to the edge that you want to have cut with the pointer. And when you see the right cut, the one you want, I want this one. Left click, and then an unusual thing happens. It puts in an orange line, but it's still moving. It's as you move the mouse, it's still moving. And this is so you can position this cut along the edge. It doesn't have to be dead center, but almost always what we do is we do want it in the dead center. So actually we cancel that move then at that stage by hitting the right mouse button to leave it in the dead center. And now that edge is all the way around, that cut is all the way around our cube, and it's dead center to it. I'm just going to switch back to vertex mode here so you can see, and I click away. You can see now there are actually new vertices and edges all the way around, and those faces where there's just one face on each of those sides are now two. So now you can start shaping this independently. So if I was to say grab that edge in the middle and I was to move it up in Z, G, Z, you know, immediately you have like a little basic kind of house type shape. Just by adding one extra edge loop, I'm now able to make a shape with that I couldn't make previously because I didn't have the extra geometry. So there are other ways that we can add additional geometry into our mesh, and we're going to look at those more next week. But that's all we covered on Saturday, so I'm going to wrap up now with the video. Hopefully it wasn't too long. It's been a while since I did one of these. I feel like I'm out of practice. So thanks for watching if you watched, and I hope it was helpful. Feel free to reach out on all the usual kind of communication channels. If you have any questions, I'll do our best to answer them. Thanks folks, and I'll see you all again on Saturday. Bye.